Welcome to lucky episode 13 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest insight scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is my 5G partner in crime, Anshel Sag. So let's get started with my topic. So I'm going to label this first of 3 my geo take on the news. And first up is the Chinese government. And there was news this week that they're mulling sanctions against, of all infrastructure providers, Nokia and Ericsson, and it's around allowing them to manufacture their products within China. Is this rationale, valid given the U.S. pressure on China? I commented on Twitter about this. I don't think so. It's very protectionist, and certainly Ericsson and Nokia have other capabilities to produce within the Asia region. Possibly South Korea, even Japan. So Anshel, what's your take on all this?
It's very retaliatory. I would say it's less protectionist and more retaliatory. Because Ericsson and Nokia are seen as alternatives to Huawei abroad, and I see this as a purely political move to one, bolster Huawei, even though Huawei has something like 60 or 70% market share in China. Mm-hmm. And basically bolster the Chinese vendors at the cost of damaging foreign companies that have done nothing or have any governmental association at all. So it's problematic.
Yeah, or any real concrete concerns. And obviously, the U.S. contends that there are security issues with Huawei gear. They can't share that based on national security concerns, but there aren't really any real justifications for why China's doing this, other than, to your point, to be protectionist and retaliatory. So it'll be interesting how it all rolls out. The second part of my geo theme here on the first question is centered on the United Kingdom, and they're exploring other infrastructure solutions given the void that's going to be created by Huawei. It's no secret, we talked about this last week, that they have voted and approved the rip and replace of LTE infrastructure and the deployment of non-Huawei gear for 5G. But it's interesting that the UK is turning to Japan. They're considering companies like NEC and Fujitsu that don't have a lot of depth in cellular infrastructure. Any comments on your part, Anshel?
I think it's a very early stage kind of outreach because I don't think like you said, I don't think they're anywhere near as prepared as they could be or should be. I think this is kind of a piggybacking on what's been going on with Rakuten and saying that they're basically like, okay, what is Rakuten doing as a new vendor that's different that we can possibly leverage as a more rapid replacement for Huawei equipment, because I think they have till 2027 or something like that.
That's right, yeah.
So I think that's a longer timeline than the UK government wants, but they've chosen that date because it's what's reasonable for the the life of infrastructure. But I think it's too early. I don't think we really know how ready they are until it really starts to grow out full commercial networks.
Yeah, and obviously you've got homegrown European heroes in Ericsson and Nokia, so it would make sense for them to be considered in the mix as well. But I agree with you; it's really early on. So let's move to your first topic this week, and you've got an update on T-Mobile and 5G.
Yeah, so T-Mobile made some big announcements last week around their scam shield. This week, it was an update on 5G availability. That OpenSignal did a analysis of actual network data and found that T-Mobile's 5G network was available 22.5% of the time, and that Sprint's was available 14% of the time, which they are now turning off. So if you combine the two, they're already at 36%, and then AT&T was at 10% and Verizon was at 0.4%, which is quite low. And they also said that they're rolling out their 2.5 gigahertz network, which is basically the refarming of Sprint Spectrum in Houston, Chicago, and LA, in addition to Philadelphia and New York.
Right.
So they're rolling out a lot more cities, which 2.5 gives them a lot more bandwidth and a lot more coverage,
Yeah.
and is very complementary to 600. And then finally, they also said that they're going to be rolling out standalone in Q3, which means that they're going to have a full bore 5G network with everything that you would expect a 5G network to have in terms of spec and capability.
4+ radio, yeah.
By the end of the year, which means that T-Mobile's latencies on 5G could be very low.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. AT&T announced earnings. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. There was also an announcement, around 5G availability. On an analyst call, one of the executives was asked point blank when to expect AT&T's rollout of standalone, and I noticed some degree of hesitance. So, right, wrong, or indifferent, T-Mobile's being very aggressive here, and they may very well be the first to deliver a standalone mobile 5G network. Yeah.
I think they'll be first, which is a bit surprising because I really thought that AT&T was much further along.
Mm-hmm.
With all the virtualization that they've been doing to their network. But I guess there might be some components of their 5G network that they hadn't upgraded that would have given them that ability to go SA.
Right.
But I mean, you can't have SA. You can't have real 5G, like what people are expecting from 5G, without having SA. So the sooner you have SA, the quicker you can start onboarding these new use cases that are latency sensitive, and you can actually get developers to start using your network to build apps. And I think that's really the key, is getting SA out there quickly means that you're going to get developers access to this newer network and start developing new applications for it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, test beds have been made available. I've visited, foundry locations with AT&T. I've visited the Verizon Alley, and they're offering test beds to mobile game designers and developers and that sort of thing, but it's very limited. And until you get that, like you mentioned, that ubiquitous deployment, that's when you're going to start seeing the real innovation from my perspective. So, and since we're on the subject of AT&T, that'll be my second topic. So they did announce 2Q earnings, and I mentioned that 5G announcement. So let's cover the earnings first. So as expected, revenue was soft, given the inability for subscribers to get physically to stores and activate new lines of service, although there may have been some of that going on, online and that sort of thing. But churn looked, very stable, reported some of the lowest churn numbers that they've seen in quite some time. Cash flow is very strong. And they also mentioned that they took advantage of the extremely low interest rates, like a lot of us have in refinancing our homes, to refinance their debt structure. So from a balance sheet perspective, they're looking super solid. And then I call it a 1-2 punch today. A few hours later in the day, AT&T announced what their forward-looking plans were for pricing 5G. And what it involves is providing 5G access at no additional charge over LTE for certain tiers of subscribers, both consumer and business unlimited plans. And certainly there'll be some lower tiers where they'll have to pay additionally. But what I found missing from that announcement was no focus on Warner Media. It's a great asset. Everyone knows that AT&T acquired Time Warner. They've got all these rich content assets. There's a lot of AR and VR opportunity there. And on that same analyst call, when asked, it seemed like AT&T was talking more about the access and not about use case. And not to throw them under the bus, like I've mentioned, I've spent a lot of time with them. I've been in the foundries. I've seen what they're doing to develop really innovative use cases like mixed reality and public safety, IoT and that sort of thing. But I felt like that was sort of the missing equation for me. Any thoughts on your part?
Yeah, I think with the new CEO in charge, the company is definitely more focused on the network and access, and much less on content, especially when you consider some of the problems that they've had with losing subscribers on the TV side, specifically DirecTV. So I think they're not helping themselves in that business by refocusing too heavily on the network itself. Obviously, the network is extremely important because it's what delivers this content. And I think that like you said, they have a very strong portfolio and they should be leveraging it more aggressively. But I think the one thing that's missing is that they are, a very large company with a lot of resources. And I think that they should absolutely be working more closely with the partner parts of Warner that are kind of advanced, like AR VR, and leveraging those more aggressively. I thought it was really clever what they were doing with Shape. I think Shape was a very, very good event.
At the Warner Brothers Studios, you and I have attended several of those.
That gave me a lot of optimism around what AT&T was doing, and I feel like this is kind of a step back. And yeah, I don't actually think it's a good idea for any vendor to be charging extra for 5G. I think that T-Mobile has the right vision in that sense, that you should be getting people on 5G as fast as possible, regardless of what it costs, because you need the scale and you want to move as many people over to 5G as you can as fast as possible, because that's how you amortize it. By charging people for it, either you are saying that you don't think it's ready and that you can't handle all the users, or that you want to find another way to pay for it, and scale isn't how you do it, which doesn't make any sense because AT&T is a massive operator.
Yeah, and I'm an advocate. We both can, weekly, and I'm a proponent of focusing on service delivery, and then that's where the ARPU uplift will come. When you look at mixed reality, both for consumer, but there are lots of applications for the enterprise as well. So I think it's a journey, but I think certainly AT&T has all the assets at its disposal. Let's shift to your second topic this week, and we were talking about Top Gun, the new Top Gun movie coming out at the end of the year, and it sounds like Top Gun may be getting 5G. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's a Marine Corps Air Base Miramar, which is actually literally my backyard. And earlier, you might have actually heard it. I think we started the podcast right after, but I usually get flyovers all the time. It's a Marine Corps Air Base. It's actually one of the more high-tech military bases in America, partially because it's in San Diego. And they're actually going to be getting Verizon's 5G millimeter wave on base. And it's actually going to be the first military base. I think either they're getting it or they already have it. But they're the first military base with 5G. And what's interesting is that they're also one of the first military bases to get a F-35 training simulator. So I think they're looking for opportunities to increase, the technical capabilities of the base, and basically improve the experience that the soldiers get and are exposed to the latest in technology. Because I think if you look at what 5G can really enable, there's a lot of use cases, and that's why they're so worried about security. Because if you're deploying this network in that space, then you absolutely want to have a secure 5G network. And that's part of the reason why I don't think this network would have ever rolled out on a military base unless they were sure it was secure.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you about the applications. You mentioned flight simulation, but I could envision, goodness, you could give a soldier some sort of heads up, kind of goggle.
One of the HoloLens headsets, they're already built for the military.
Yeah, and so and 5G will enable that. Yeah,
they will.
So that so it's exciting. So well, kudos to Verizon for enabling that. Yeah.
And the thing is that they can totally use that 5G network as an opportunity to test this new capability in a way they couldn't before because they just didn't have the bandwidth for it. But to be fair, Verizon did also launch their 5G network in San Diego, so they already have a couple of deployments, which I've seen in person, downtown-ish. But yeah, it's interesting. It's exciting. They have plans for about 5 or 6 other bases around the country. This was the first one, but they've got more coming over the next 6-12 months.
Awesome, exciting stuff. Well, let's talk about my third topic, and it's Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And they actually announced today they've opened a 5G lab, and it's focused on really driving open source, multi-vendor. They're inviting wide participation by the industry, including Nokia, which I found surprising, because I kind of see, you've got the traditional single purpose infrastructure guys, in one camp, and then you've got the disaggregated compute storage guys in the other camp. There's some crossover. And as we talked about, I believe last week, certainly the big infrastructure providers in Nokia and Samsung are aggressively behind Open RAN, where some of the others aren't. But this is really about driving open standards. And I've been following HPE for quite a while, and their telco team, they're quite capable. They had several announcements at Discover that support 5G, and it's supporting everything from, from cloud, from edge to cloud to core. And it's quite impressive what HPE is doing. So any thoughts there?
Not particularly. I do think that, HPE opening up their labs is important because, like you said, there needs to be interoperability.
Yeah.
And, companies won't know what HPE's equipment can do unless they have a chance to play with it.
Right.
And I think the labs are kind of something that a lot of companies do nowadays to expose themselves to other companies' hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And give other companies an opportunity to figure out what bugs they might encounter when they start, having this infrastructure tied to their equipment.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. All the carriers have validation labs. I've visited Verizon on the East Coast, and Ericsson actually has a 5G lab that's in my home town of Austin, Texas. But it's great to see that HPE is jumping in the fray here. So let's move to your final topic this week, and you've got an update on China Mobile.
Yeah, so China Mobile, obviously the largest operator in China, I believe actually the world now, because they've got 946 million subscribers, which is almost a billion, which is kind of hard to believe.
I'd say they're pretty big.
Yeah. I think in India, the top three are all about 300 million each. So they split a billion. But China Mobile is just a billion on its own, basically. Right. And they reported that they added 14.4 million 5G subscribers in the month of June alone, which now sets them at a total of 70.2 million 5G subscribers, which is compared to the 6.7 million they had in January. And they said that they are expecting to continue to grow that. I think this number still falls in line with the 220 million number we were seeing from the GSA, where they were expecting that about 220 million subscribers globally will have 5G. So if we're, mid-year 70 million, I expect that to, grow in pace. So they would at least double that to 140. Realistically, we're probably looking at like 150, 160 from them. And that's just one operator in one country.
Yeah, that growth rate's astounding, from January to June. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think it helps that COVID is less of a factor than it was in the beginning of the year.
Good point. In China, yeah, definitely in China.
Right.
Yeah, it's leveled off. Yeah.
So that plus, I think that there's a bigger 5G push now because of what happened with COVID and the government wanting to push vendors and OEMs. And the smartphones didn't stop coming. So people are still going to keep, upgrading phones and getting new phones. And the prices of 5G phones keep going down. So for example, the new LG that just came out, it's a $600 phone, but LG is discounting it to $300 on AT&T. And there's a ton of phones that are going to be coming out within the next 6 months that are going to be using this new cheap 5G, chipset from Qualcomm that we wrote about or talked about. Well, I wrote about it and we talked about it in previous podcasts. But that's going to enable $200 to $300 5G phones. And when you have $200 to $300, you get volume.
Yeah, and that's going to drive adoption and subscription. So, well, hey, buddy, another great podcast with you this week. Why don't you take us home?
Sure. We hope that our viewers and listeners found this week's podcast interesting. And if anyone out there would like to provide any insights to other topics that they would like for us to cover in a future podcast, we please hope that you would reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel on Twitter. We hope that you guys have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.